Welcome to Ask an Atheist. We are your hosts. I'm Liz Cavell, one of FFRF's attorneys.
And I'm Andrew Seidel, an attorney and the Director of Strategic Response here at FFRF.
So today we're going to recap a fiery hearing that the House of Representatives held last week on the Trump administration and its weaponizing of religious liberty. As always, comment right here on Facebook below or send an email to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Share your questions or comments.
Now, as we go live right now, the Supreme Court is wrapping up oral arguments in a really crucial case, June Medical Services versus Russo. The case involves a Louisiana law that required physicians who provide abortions to hold active admitting privileges at a hospital located within 30 miles of the clinic. So the whole reason for this provision was to limit the abortion providers in Louisiana, and they successfully did that down to just one remaining clinic. That was the goal.
Right. So this isn't about health or safety. Obviously, abortions are incredibly safe. This is about overturning reproductive rights and cases that protect our reproductive rights. So perhaps the scariest aspect of the case is that an identical provision was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court when Justice Kennedy was still on the bench. So essentially, the only difference between that case and this case is the makeup of the court. Mm-hmm. And so a change in court personnel could mean a change in our constitutional rights. So that should send a chill down your spine.
It really should. And I mean, this is an issue that we're all passionate about. And at FFRF, we understand that reproductive rights is actually a state church issue. So Liz, what did we do to help in this fight?
Right. So FFRF joined our voice in with 71 other groups in filing a friend of the court brief in this case, an amicus brief. This brief was authored by the National Women's Law Center. And it argues that abortion restrictions like the ones in Louisiana limit women's autonomy and dignity by basically retreating to an old notion that women are solely destined for the rearing of children and the home. And it also highlighted the physical impact on women. And I'm quoting the brief here: forcing women and others who can become pregnant to carry a pregnancy threatens their health, safety, and bodily autonomy, often with grave results. Basically talking about the impact of these laws on people who can become pregnant. They're dangerous. Not only are they not genuinely for the purpose of promoting health and safety, they actually have the opposite result.
Harmful effects.
And yes, this is a state church issue, and that's because the opposition to reproductive rights and freedom has always been religiously motivated or based on religiously motivated doctrine, not medicine or genuine understanding of human rights. And so we try not to lose sight of the fact that this is really a religion influencing policy issue.
It is.
So that's an important case. We'll keep an eye on it for you. But let's get to the hearing.
Yeah, so last Thursday, the House Oversight Committee, the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, held a hearing with the title, "The Administration's Religious Liberty Assault on LGBTQ Rights." So they're not pulling any punches there. And if you follow the link on the screen, it will actually take you to full video coverage of the hearing. But this is a drum that we have been banging for a long time here at FFRF. We've been trying to warn everyone about Christian nationalists and their attempt to weaponize religious liberty.
Right. And this administration has been dismantling a lot of important aspects of the administrative state. See also response to the coronavirus. But when it comes to redefining religious liberty, the Trump administration has actually beefed up the administrative state. This has been a pet project of the Trump administration. So it began when Trump signed Executive Order 13798. This was in May of 2017, requiring federal agencies to expand religious exemptions wherever possible. That order is implemented by the White House Faith and Opportunity Initiative. Yeah. That's where Paula White works.
Yes, I mean, that's just unbelievable still. The Trump administration has also set up the Religious Liberty Task Force at the Department of Justice. You may remember that. The Conscience and Religious Freedom Division at the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Commission on Unalienable Rights at the Department of State. And the goal of each of these is, again, to weaponize religious freedom.
Right. And finally, Congress is waking up and trying to do something about this. And so the hearing was co-chaired by Representative Jamie Raskin. He's a founding member of the Free Thought Caucus, and also co-chaired by Representative Carolyn Maloney.
And Chairwoman Maloney is not related to Representative Sean Maloney, who was one of the first witnesses at the hearing. He told a personal story that really encapsulates the issues before the committee. So let's take a look at that clip.
On January 10th, 2001, I learned of my oldest daughter, who had been born just 5 days earlier. We had no intention of adopting. That she had been born in Texas to a United States military member, to the granddaughter of a United States military member. Her mom was 14 years old. She didn't even know she was pregnant. She was playing basketball and complained of cramps and delivered the baby when the doctors thought she had appendicitis. And they called us because no one else was going to do it. And so 13 days later, my partner and I were standing in front of a Texas judge at 8 o'clock in the morning before his docket started. And he said, "Are you fellas going to raise this child?" And we said, "Yes, sir." And he finalized the adoption on the spot. No rescission rights in the state of Texas. 13 days after that child was born, she was home in New York with 2 loving parents, and that child is 19 years old today and a freshman at John Jay College in New York. And she's a beautiful young woman. And she would not have had a mom and a dad. So you keep having them, and we'll keep raising them. And so we're here because the Trump administration, as we know, has green-lighted license discriminate laws to allow federally funded organizations to discriminate against adoptive and foster parents who don't share the organization's religious beliefs, and that means also LGBTQ parents and people of other religions won't be able to adopt. And those kids are the ones that are going to lose. Hundreds of thousands of kids who need foster parents, who need adoptive parents. That is the collateral damage that will ensue if we allow these discriminatory practices to occur under the guise of religious freedom. Our only goal when providing child services should be looking out for the best interests of the kids. That's all that matters. LGBTQ couples are not afraid of that test. Parents are parents. Good parents are good parents. Bad parents are bad parents. And it doesn't matter what they look like, who they love.
So we want to start with that clip because it's really moving. I would encourage people to go watch his full testimony. I think it's 6 or maybe 7 minutes. But it really does put a face on this issue, which is if you allow people to discriminate in the name of their God, they are discriminating against somebody. There's a real human cost to that.
Yeah, a really powerful story, and what he's obviously illustrating is efforts by the Trump administration to elevate the rights of these adoption agencies and groups that facilitated adoptions that are faith-based to reject and discriminate against parents that violate the faith of the organization. In other words, non-traditional parents and families like Representative Maloney. So that's pretty powerful stuff. And of course, that is what's going on and being expanded under the Trump administration is federally funded adoption agencies being given license to discriminate.
And Representative Maloney and his now husband, he said partner there, but they're now married. They've actually adopted 3 kids and raised them. And I mean, this is, I think, one of the core fights that we are going to be facing. And like I said in the introduction, we've been talking about this for it seems like a decade at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, trying to wake people up to the real danger of this issue. And you're seeing now Congress take this on, which is incredibly heartening.
Right.
I think one of the central things that we really need, that people watching really need to understand, is that there is a human cost to this, that kids are not going to be placed with families, that people are not going to get access to government services like housing and food stamps and things like that because they are in an area that's serviced by a group that's meant to provide government services but is doing it on the basis of their religious beliefs, not on the basis of how the government ought to be providing services. And the Supreme Court actually accepted an alarming case on this very issue, but we'll talk about that in a minute. First, let's watch Representative Jamie Raskin, co-founding member of the Free Thought Caucus, who also helped chair this hearing, and see what he had to say.
Indeed, the religious liberty of the people is protected by vigorous enforcement of equal protection in the Establishment Clause. As Madison emphasized, the major threat to my religious freedom comes from another person or group's capture of state power and their use of government to impose their religious dogma and control on everyone else. Today, the equal rights of the LGBTQ community are threatened by the administration's determination to pass out licenses to discriminate based on the rampant misinterpretation of the meaning of religious liberty.
Yeah, really great stuff there.
Right.
I love to hear any congressperson talking about the separation of state and church and the Establishment Clause.
Right, and of course, kind of putting it in the face of the Christian nationalist narrative that this was an intentional part of the project for the founders. He quoted Madison. Obviously, the idea that individuals would try to use state and government power or wield state government power to impose the restrictions of their religious beliefs on other people who are not members of their religion was something that was understood by our founders, and that our founders did not want to be possible under our system of government.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Using the machinery of the state to impose your religion on somebody else is a fundamental violation of that core freedom that we hold so dear, and that's what Representative Raskin was getting at.
Right. So we have another clip too, right?
Yes, we have a couple more. This one's from Representative Kennedy. And we've got a special guest after we show this one.
The enforcement of RFRA has morphed into something far more dangerous, something that threatens the freedom of religion for each and every one of us. Because instead of shielding vulnerable Americans from persecution, this has now become a sword used to marginalize vulnerable communities. In our nation's history, few have wielded that sword more violently, more painfully, than this president and this administration, most recently with 9 proposed rules to open up our society to increased hate and violence. Let's be very clear about who has been left in that hateful wake. Students bullied by peers, faculty and school leadership with nowhere else to turn. Pregnant teachers forced out of lifelong careers. Patients forced to suffer because of someone else's religious belief. Workers fired or forced onto an unemployment line for living their own lives. Homeless Americans denied shelter because this administration does not believe that they are worthy of housing. Children denied loving families. These are Americans asking and begging to be treated the same as the next student at the desk, the next loving parents looking to adopt a child, the next employee to put on a uniform, and the next person seeking asylum or shelter. That is what the Do No Harm Act is about that I worked on and filed with Bobby Scott. It is a bill intended to restore RFRA to its original purpose and to clarify that no one can claim religious exemption from laws that protect against basic discrimination, govern wages and collective bargaining, prohibit child labor and abuse, provide access to health care, regulate public accommodations, or provide social services through government contracts. A bill to reestablish a lesson that Americans have learned painfully for generations, that if civil and legal rights exist only in the absence of a neighbor's religious objection, then they are not civil rights, but empty promises.
So to talk more about this, we are going to bring on Mark Dan, FFRF's Director of Government Affairs, and he is joining us from DC. Hi, Mark.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good. So, Mark, tell us about the Do No Harm Act and what Kennedy's talking about there. We know you've been doing just a ton of work on this bill lately, so catch us up to speed.
Yeah, the Do No Harm Act, sponsored by Representative Kennedy, is really one of our key pieces of legislation this season. We have 173 co-sponsors on it, so the vast majority of the Democratic caucus is moving forward on the bill. Plus, we're working very closely with Representative Kennedy's office, who has been extremely helpful, and we're being recognized as a leader on the bill. I'm pleased to announce that we're also going to be working very closely with our allies with AU, religious, non-affiliated allies, to move the bill forward, and we hope to get a hearing in the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay, so this is a big push. It's a really important bill because it amends the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It essentially says that God is not a license to discriminate. And
Correct.
So, I mean, you said you got 170 plus co-sponsors. We've got all these groups. We're working with Americans United, and you want to have this hearing. So what's the holdup? Why can't we get this, or what are the next steps, I guess is a better way to put that. What do you expect to see happening next?
The next steps, we hope that a lot of FRF supporters are going to be talking to their legislators to help advocate to push for the hearing. And the hearing is really important is in the legislative process, because the hearing will allow us to get a broader voice on the committee, and also position us for a markup where it eventually will be voted and passed out of committee. And we hope it'll make it to the Senate floor where we expect it to pass.
I mean, so this is kind of a big deal, something to be working on. It's nice to have a piece of legislation that's positive that we're advocating for, as opposed to something we're fighting against.
Is there any bipartisan support for the bill at all, or have you any hope of any bipartisan support?
We hope so, and the glimmer of hope is there were about 8 people who did support the Equality Act, which has a lot of similar intentions of Do No Harm Act. The Act bans discrimination in LGBTQ folks. However, I think what you can see from the hearing on oversight with the LGBTQ decimation of those rights on the federal level, you are seeing a very strong, very hostile line almost from many Republican members. So I think that position might be quite difficult to achieve.
Yes, I mean, they are hostile to this idea generally. They're very big into the weaponization of religious liberty. But you did mention that one thing our members could do, that FFRF folks could do, would be to contact their representatives and tell their representatives to support the Do No Harm Act. Did I hear that right?
Right. And also beyond support, move it towards a hearing and get a markup on it to pass it out of committee. The good news with a lot of the co-sponsors on it, the support is there. We just need to get it up the priority scale with what Congress is dealing with. Plus, there's also a time consideration on this, because that as we get closer to Memorial Day, and especially July 4th, everyone is going to be very much focused on the election. So clock's tick.
Okay, so FFRF members, if you're watching this, or supporters, if you're watching this, call your rep, tell them to support the Do No Harm Act, tell them to get a hearing going. Right.
Let your representatives know this bill is a priority to you, and that's whether or not you think your representative is already supportive or not. That means both parties, whoever your representative is, call them, email them, let them know this bill is a priority to you.
Pick up the phone. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got meetings on the Hill, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. Liz and I will do our best to answer questions for you. And just remember, viewers, again, tell your reps to support the Do No Harm Act. It really is important.
Right. So thank you, Mark. And back to the hearing. Mm-hmm. The other side of this issue, the wrong side, also had a witness at the hearing, and they even asked him a question.
How can we strive to make sure that the LGBTQ rights and the religious freedoms rights coexist?
The best way to do that is through the proper negotiation and congressional process that we have here, instead of asking the executive branch to do it by fiat, which is this particular administration doesn't appear to want to do.
I mean, I think that is one of the worst answers I've ever heard, and I'd be so embarrassed if I gave that answer to a congressional committee.
Right, and I guess what he's getting at is and we should maybe no. What he's getting at is that, the hearing is aimed at the actions of the Trump administration, which has taken many actions by fiat to limit the rights of LGBTQ Americans in all manner of aspects of social, economic, and cultural life. And we touched on several of those at the top of the show. And, he's saying it's for Congress to protect or not protect these rights as they see fit.
It was such a bad answer. And the question, itself is loaded. The bottom line is that your religion is never an excuse to violate anybody else's rights ever.
Right.
So the way they coexist is your religion does not trump somebody else's civil rights. That's the way we've always understood it in this country.
Right. And what's happening in this administration and on the, in the religious rights sort of movement is not the coexistence of religious rights and other civil rights of people outside your religion. It is like the elevation of religious rights above all other considerations and all other, schemes of civil rights that we have held sacred in our culture for decades. Like, saying that your free exercise of religion right is the most important right and everything else is subservient to that is pretty much the
it's Christian
scheme.
Privilege.
Yeah, but it's also the scheme that's kind of being put forth by the Trump administration and, of course, organizations like the one Mr. Sasser represents.
And really what the end goal of that, which I think you summed up nicely, is it makes Christians a privileged, favored class. They are first-class citizens, and everybody else is a second-class citizen. And we should point out, too, that it's not just Christians generally. It's a specific subset of Christianity, conservative Christianity that opposes gay marriage, opposes women's rights, things like that is being elevated.
Right.
And minority religions and even the wrong kind of Christian are also thrown under the bus here.
Right. There's no realistic reckoning with whether and how, and this was touched on in other parts of the hearing, and I encourage everyone to watch the rest of the hearing. It was, I think, really valuable in bringing this sort of like terrible underbelly to the surface and have open discussion in Congress. You can check it out right there. You're seeing the URL, ffrf.us/religious liberty. You can click on the first video and watch the whole entire hearing. But there's no real reckoning with how this expansive right to exercise your religion, to deny other people, basic rights and access, how that would be expanded to people outside of this, conservative Christian context. Some people have tried to ask, kind of probing questions about how would this, where would we limit this if, the person wielding their religious right is, believes in or doesn't believe in medical care whatsoever, or doesn't, all this possible parade of eventualities when you take these rights to their limit. And there's just been no realistic reckoning with it, because there's just a sort of wink and nod understanding that this is for people whose religious beliefs tell them something about gay people and birth control.
Yeah.
And that's really all we expect this to protect.
But the rationale would, as you just pointed out, be expansive. And Representative Rhoda from Ohio asked a question that kind of got to that point. So let's take a look at that clip.
So let's go a step further down the path here, because there are many protected classes that include race and color. So if those classes were not directly protected under U.S. law, and somebody had a faith-based reason to discriminate against them, under the Trump administration and the Republicans who support it, they too could be discriminated against. Is that correct?
So the Trump administration in their filings has drawn a hard line at race in most circumstances. But they've made clear that individuals with disabilities, women, people of minority faiths, and the LGBTQ community should be subject to a different set of standards, allowing for widespread discrimination, including in the healthcare space.
So that was Representative Rhoda, and that was Ms. Warbelow. She's the legal director of the Human Rights Campaign, I believe, answering that question. And to me, the interesting thing to hear is that there really is, at least from the legal theoretical standpoint, there's no way to separate race out. If you give people a right, especially if it's a constitutional right, to discriminate on the basis of their religion against others, there's no way you can say, well, you can only discriminate against handicapped people or LGBT people. You can't discriminate on the basis of race. There's no way to draw a line like that.
Right. I mean, it's not logical. And of course, we know this because these same exact religious justifications were raised at every stage of the battle for civil rights related to race as a justification for race-based discrimination on the basis of sincerely held religious beliefs. Of course, we've heard all these same rationales before. But as HRC is pointing out in that clip, the Trump administration and, the defenders of these, these expansive religious liberty rights are explicitly saying that, okay, we'll give you race-based discrimination, bad. All
Everything
other
else.
discrimination groups, we don't view them as a class worthy of protection. It's just going to be, religious rights are more important than protecting these minority groups, and they include LGBTQ status in that sort of unimportant, not rising to the level of race-based discrimination.
When ADF, they're sort of the anti-FFRF, when they were arguing the Masterpiece Cake Shop case at the Supreme Court, a lot of the justices kept asking, what about race? How is race different than LGBTQ status? And they had no answer. Their attorney had no answer. There is no logical or legally different way.
And then I think, in Masterpiece Cake Shop, the opinion, that's why that
they punted.
Is just a mess of an opinion, because I think all of the justices are reluctant to issue a ruling about free exercise rights being violated by basically having to comply with civil rights laws, because there's no containing that rationale to LGBTQ discrimination.
So we're going to get to your questions in just a sec. We're going to look at one more clip. Again, really go watch the whole hearing. Representative Tlaib had some great comments. Representative Katie Porter had some excellent ones as well. For our last clip, we're going to watch AOC and see what she had to say. This went viral.
There is nothing holy about rejecting medical care of people, no matter who they are, on the grounds of what their identity is. There is nothing holy about turning someone away from a hospital. There's nothing holy about rejecting a child from a family. There's nothing holy about writing discrimination into the law. And I am tired of communities of faith being weaponized and being mischaracterized, because the only time religious freedom is invoked is in the name of bigotry and discrimination.
So really, really strong rhetoric there. She's so very good at what she does. The one hesitation I have there, and I would encourage people to, again, go watch her whole clip, is, she's essentially engaging in a theological argument in a way. She's saying, it's religiously wrong to say that this kind of discrimination is okay. But I mean, to me, that argument, it's powerful and I think it needs to be made, but really I don't think it's going to fly, because the Bible is the basis of the religion that we're talking about here, and the Bible is an incredibly conservative book. I mean, that's why, as you said earlier, it's been used and was used to justify segregation. I mean, all of the pro-segregation arguments for the most part were religious. The same thing with the pro-slavery arguments throughout history. I mean, and that's because when you trace all this back, it goes to the Bible, and it's this terribly conservative book.
I mean, I think she's pushing back on the idea that, there's something good about, that all religious beliefs are basically equally deserving of our reverence and our yielding. And I mean, I think she's arguing, and I think she herself identifies as a Christian too, and is sort of trying to engage people who are not
On that-
conservative
on that
Christians,
field, yeah.
but people who are kind of with her or somewhere in that religious identifying space, but don't have a problem following the law and yielding to civil laws.
And I think it's an
normal
important
people.
argument to make. I just think at bottom, it's not one that we can really ever win. But
Yeah.
But anyway, should we see if our viewers have any questions?
Yeah. So I've got the iPad here. I'm sure our viewers have some questions or comments. So let's check it out. Let's see here.
And Bruce, can you throw up the link to the full hearing one more time, just so people can see? ffrf.us/religious liberty.
Right. Yeah. So again, you can check out the hearing on our website. Right there, embedded, ffrf.us/religious liberty. You can see kind of the screenshot there. There's embedded YouTube videos. You can watch the whole entire hearing there.
Yeah.
I think this is a plant. This is from Dan Barker. Is there an easy way for me to contact my legislator about do no harm? I think Dan wants us to reiterate the action alert and how to do that, how to reach out to legislators. Andrew, you want to give a little tip?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing people can do is if you text FFRF to 52886, you will be signed up for our action alerts. You will know whenever FFRF wants you to contact your legislator. You'll have it right there. It'll pop up right on your phone. You just click a couple buttons, and it's really easy to do. And then we do put out action alerts, so you can sign up for our action alerts on the FFRF website if you don't want it going to your phone. And we make it really, really easy on you to be able to basically just 3 clicks and you've contacted your legislator and asked them to support the Do No Harm Act and to give it a hearing. So sign up for those.
Great.
Thank you, Dan.
Linda Noyes asks, Trump's spiritual advisor, we mentioned earlier, Paula White, recently told her congregation to skip paying electric bills so they can send her church more money. Haven't fact-checked that, but it sounds about right.
I mean, she is a prosperity gospel teacher.
So isn't that unconstitutional because she is now a government figure? Well, it is evil, but is it unconstitutional?
It's evil, it's immoral. I don't think it would rise to the level of unconstitutionality. I mean, all government workers and officials and staffers still have religious freedom rights that they can exercise when they're not in their
She's not
official
acting in her
capacity.
official capacity as whatever she is.
But this is the problem.
But she's acting in her personal, terrible capacity, so it's fine.
But that's also the problem with hiring somebody like Paula White, whose whose primary goal is religious for a religious role in the White House. It's a problem that we have this faith-based office in the White House at all. So, I mean, what they're doing is blurring all of those lines. So I think that the question is at least well taken because they are, and I think deliberately blurring all those lines.
Do pay your electric bill.
Yes.
Do not give your money to Paula White. Pay your electric bill.
I mean, and the prosperity gospel is just so parasitic and disgusting. I mean, that quote is pretty tame compared to some of the things that you read or that you've seen. I remember, hearing once, you may have only $10 left, and instead of going and buying bread or food, send that to me, and you'll get it back 100-fold. I mean, that is just so disgusting to do to people. Anyway, not Paula White.
Period.
But.
So this is a little broad, but we'll take it. Tina Marie Jackson Messer asks, how do we fight against people of faith who believe religious freedom gives them the right to intrude into secular spaces to promote their beliefs without any ability to push back against them? I don't know if that means physically in secular spaces or all the government spaces.
I think the thing to really think about is you can't use the machinery of the state to promote your personal religion. You don't get a government microphone to preach on. That's where really we draw the line. I mean, that doesn't mean that people can't be out on a public sidewalk
with an actual microphone.
With an actual microphone or bullhorn even talking about their religion. They should just have to obey the same rules as everyone else. But again, I think conceptualizing it for them in terms of using the the machinery of the state, using state resources, using that government microphone can be very effective. And the analogy that we use all the time is, I mean, I'm assuming Tina is probably encountering Christians who are doing this. I mean, ask them to imagine if it was a religion that scares them or which they disagree with, like Islam. So if you had the government telling everybody to have a national day of prayer to Allah and turn and bow to Mecca, you might be able to better understand why a national day of prayer is problematic.
Speaking of which, this is the last question from Joe Cano, and it's about the coronavirus task force. Franklin Graham tweeted a photo of Pence and the president's coronavirus task force praying when they met last week in his office. Is this a potential violation of church and state?
I mean, it's probably not a violation for them to pray, but they are doing that in lieu of what appears to be any other type of response. I mean, Pence, we've been talking this whole episode about how people are using their religion to discriminate and the religiously motivated bigotry to harm others. And I mean, Pence did that as governor of Indiana. He passed one of these Religious Freedom Restoration Act laws, which essentially weaponizes religious liberty. His response to the AIDS issue there, I mean, he essentially is responsible for an AIDS outbreak in the state of Indiana because of his backward religious views and using them to craft state policy instead of science and reason and medicine.
Right. So it's kind of carrying that tradition to the coronavirus problem. So
yeah, I mean, it's really, really alarming. And the whole administration's response to this has been very alarming, including putting Pence in charge. And on that note, finally, goes in the, as Bruce has put it, we'll just leave this here department. So there is a Catholic shrine in France, Our Lady of Lourdes, and pilgrims go to the shrine to dip into the healing waters, to bathe in those waters. But the healing pools at Lourdes have been closed as a precaution against the coronavirus because they don't heal anything and are just cesspools.
That's gross.
It's super gross.
Cool.
Anatole France used to he related this story about he was visiting Lourdes with a buddy of his.
What are they? Like Turkish bath type scenario?
Well, I think they're more natural-ish pools.
Okay.
And so he was there with his buddy, and there's a grotto with all the crutches of people who had been healed, these healing waters, and his buddy points to them and said, one wooden leg would be more to the point. So we'll just leave that right there.
That is our show for this week. Thanks again for watching. I think there's no show next week.
No show next week, but the week after that, we'll see you.
People will be on the road next week, so tune in the week after next, same time and place for FFRF's Ask an Atheist.